Hello, everybody. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2023 Players Championship Initial Research Show. Hopefully, you all saw my note on social media, particularly Twitter, about Friday evening, how I was not going to be able to have a live stream. My power got knocked out with all of the storms that crossed through the Midwest. So hopefully you saw that note. And if you want updates to my schedule, give me a follow over at all of the links in the description to my social media. But hopefully you had a good week at the Arnold Palmer and Puerto Rico. There was not a lot for me to be excited about. Pretty dismal performance on my end. Everything that could go wrong did. Sung Jae missed by one spot, not just one shot, but one spot. He finished T21. If he finishes T20, I cash a parlay. Max Homa missed by one shot on cashing two other parlays. Matt Fitzpatrick decided to really suck Saturday, or else he probably would have been in contention for that win ticket. And then Puerto Rico, while I had the second place finisher, the third place finisher, those don't count if you bet them to win the tournament. So a very, very poor performance in regards to my performance this week for the Arnold Palmer and the Puerto Rico Open. But if you had success, please let me know in social media, in chat, however you are able to get a hold of me or get in touch with me. I want to be able to shout out members of the community that have success. And I have not heard from anyone yet this week. So hopefully you are celebrating and haven't gotten around to letting me know. But we move forward to the Players Championship, the fifth major, as almost everyone deems it, the biggest tournament on the PGA Tour, arguably. 156 players this week at the iconic TPC Sawgrass. So let's get into it. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from fantasynational.com. It is the best tool out there for your money. It's going to make you a much smarter gambler and a much better DFS player. Go check them out. It's well worth your investment. In the description to the video, there are links to all of my social media, as I mentioned before, Twitter and Instagram. This is where I post, as I mentioned, any updates to schedules or if any streams are going to be changed or not happening due to, as Friday evenings, weather. But the Twitter and Instagram is where I put my summary of the research that I do throughout the week for each tournament. So there will be research out more than likely tomorrow around the Players Championship, patterns of the previous winners and whatnot, maybe even some course data. But if you want to see the summary of the research that I do, give me a follow at those two places. Twitter is also where I post my betting cards. So if you want to see the betting card that I have each week, give me a follow over at Twitter. And then the link to my Twitch channel is also in the description. This is where I do all of my in-depth research for each golf tournament, as well as going back a week and critiquing my performance, my mixed condition models. I'll show you the lineups that I played, all of that stuff. So if you want to see the in-depth research, if you want to see the analysis that I do or the self-critique on my end for my lineups and my mixed condition model, and also some other content as well, baseball, some gaming, all of that. So if you are interested in any of that, give me a follow over at Twitch. And then finally, we're live. Chat is open. Want to hear from you all. As I mentioned, if you had success, please let me know. Jump into chat. Let me know how it went. How did your Arnold Palmer go? How did your Puerto Rico go if you made any wagers or played any DFS contests? What are you looking forward to for the players? Do you have any early leans? Any suspects on wagers that you want to that you're thinking about making? All of that good stuff. So let's do our initial research for the 2023 Players Championship. And we're going to start at the GCSA tournament fact sheet. However, this is last year's mixed condition model. Geez, this is last year's tournament fact sheet, as this year's has not been released yet. Let me center this camera very quickly. But TPC Sawgrass has not changed a whole lot throughout the years. It was most recently renovated in 2016 by Pete Dye and Steve Winslow. But for the most part, the course has stayed very consistent. The most famous, maybe even the most famous hole in golf, the Island Green, the 17th, here at TPC Sawgrass. So let's take a look at TPC Sawgrass. It is in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, just outside Jacksonville. It is a par 72 that measures 7,256 yards, or at least that was the official scorecard listing last year. Generally plays in the mid 72s, maybe upper 7200s. So nothing to do with short or long courses this week. The average green size, 5,500 square feet, so either right at average or slightly under it, depending on what number you find. I've seen anywhere from 5,500 to 6,000 square feet being the average tour green. So right at average, maybe slightly smaller. The fairways, fairly narrow, not necessarily difficult to hit, but fairly narrow. There is a lot of rough in play, but the big thing with TPC Sawgrass, just like we had 2 weeks ago at the Honda, 17 holes with water in play. Honda had 15, PGA National. TPC Sawgrass, 17 holes with water in play. The greens have always been Bermuda, or at least labeled as Bermuda. They are overseeded with Poa trivialis and Velvet Bentgrass, but they've always been labeled as Bermuda. And they have Bermuda throughout the course as well. This celebration Bermuda in the fairways and the rough. The rough is generally not terribly long. So again, the fairways aren't too tough to hit, and the players that don't hit the fairways, they don't seem to be too penalized for doing so, unlike what you saw at Bay Hill for the Arnold Palmer. That rough was rather gnarly, as the saying goes. Another key facet of TPC Sawgrass, it is a Pete Dye design, so we are going to be looking at some Pete Dye metrics this week, throughout the week for TPC Sawgrass and the Players Championship. But there's a look at the players from a GCSA tournament fact sheet. Again, a quick rundown. Par 72, honestly a little bit on the shorter end of a par 72, but we're not going to be looking at any short courses as it still measures above 7,200 yards. The greens are right at tour average, maybe slightly smaller. The fairways can get narrow, but the rough isn't too terrible to play out of. 17 holes with water in play. We are on Bermuda throughout the course, on the greens, fairways, and rough, and a Pete Dye design. I did look at Windfinder a little bit earlier today. There does appear to be the potential for wind. Don't think we're going to look at too much in terms of wind this evening. We'll save that for tomorrow, once we have a day closer to the tournament and a day's more supposedly accurate forecast. So again, the PGA Tour has designated the Players Championship as a designated event, a premier event. So your top players in the world that aren't on LIV are here this week again. Scotty Scheffler, John Rahm, Rory, Patrick Cantlay, Tony Finau. I mean, the who's who, just like all of these other premier events, the Players Championship draws the best players in the world. Your defending champion, however, is not allowed to participate. Your defending champion is Cameron Smith. He has moved on to LIV. But every other winner going back to 2012 is playing, with the exception of Tiger Woods. Tiger is not in the field this week. All right, so let's see. Let's take a look at, let's start with some Pete Dye metrics. This is a Pete Dye design. Probably going to have to expand the timeline. Only 16 rounds is the most that any player has had on a Pete Dye design in the past year plus. So let's expand this out to the beginning of 2021. And your top performers on Pete Dye designs since the start of 2021 have been Shane Lowry, Corey Connors, Brian Harmon, Sung Jae, Patrick Cantley, Will Zalatoris, John Rahm, Justin Thomas, Keegan Bradley, and Siwoo Kim. To note the courses that are consistently on the PGA Tour: Harbour Town, which is played the week after the Masters. Harbour Town is the host of the RBC Heritage. That is a long-running tournament on the PGA Tour. That is a Pete Dye design. You have the Stadium course out in La Jolla, or not at La Jolla, excuse me, for the American Express. Gosh dang it, La Quinta. So the Stadium course, where they play Sunday for the American Express, is a Pete Dye design. TPC Louisiana used to be an individual event. It is still the host of the Zurich Classic. Zurich used to be an individual event, now is a team event, but TPC Louisiana is a Pete Dye design. Of course, TPC Sawgrass and TPC River Highlands for the Travelers in Cromwell, Connecticut. Let's see. Some majors: Crooked Stick, Kiowa, the site of the 2021 PGA, and then Whistling Straits, most recently seen at the Ryder Cup. Also Pete Dye designs. All right, so there's a look at your top Pete Dye design players. Shane Lowry, your number one player. God, what the heck? Let's see. He has performed well at the RBC Heritage in the past. He's also played the Players fairly well. Siwoo Kim, winner of the American Express and the winner of the Players in previous seasons. So very good form on Pete Dye designs. Sung Jae has also played Pete Dye designs very, very well. Let's see, RBC Heritage he's played well. The Players, I believe he's done well in a couple of tries here. So there's a look at your top Pete Dye design performers since the start of 2021. But before we go any further, and I'm going to bring this timeline back into the start of 2022, let's take a look at TPC Sawgrass from a Fantasy National scorecard and graphical view. And the first thing I always like to do is take a look at the 9th and 10th most difficult holes, try to figure out where par is. Well, the 10th is still slightly over par. The 12th is still slightly over par. 13th still, again, slightly over par. But then the 14th most difficult hole plays to 15/100ths under par. So you've got a big gap here between the 13th and 14th most difficult holes. So somewhere in there is where par would fall. But hopefully you see the amount of strokes under par that the easiest holes play to here at TPC Sawgrass. So you've got the par 5 second plays to a third of a shot under par. 15/100ths, a little bit over a quarter of a shot over par. 4/10ths under par. Generally, this rates out as average. You do have some individual rounds that'll get easy, maybe even difficult if the wind picks up and whatnot, but generally this rates out to average. The average strokes gained by shot type here at TPC Sawgrass, a strokes gained approach over 1, even for the top 10s. That is quite a bit, as pretty substantial. Off the tee and around the green, fairly close to each other. Off the tee, slightly ahead. So for the top 10s, it has been a ball striking course, as Pete Dye courses generally are. Top 5s, you see the strokes gained approach really start to take off. 1.2 average per round for the players in the top 5. But again, the around the green and off the tee are pretty similar. 4300ths, 4200ths. So in fact, around the green actually surpasses off the tee for the top 5s. And then the winners, as you would expect, you're making putts if you're winning tournaments, but even still, approach is the biggest shot type here. Off the tee, hovering just above a half a shot per round. Round the green, again, slightly higher. So the graph, while it is showing ball striking is the major factor, and I agree with that, I actually think it's quite a bit more, especially for the winners, because winners generally are just making putts anyway. I want to keep your attention here to the top 10s, and that's a decent amount of separation between ball striking and short game, and all of it due to the approach. So strokes gained approach is the biggest shot type here at TPC Sawgrass. We move down to average strokes gained by hole by par, 5s, 4s, and then 3s. To be expected for par 72s. You have 4 par 5s. They're generally the easiest holes on the course. In fact, the easiest, second easiest, third easiest, and the 5th easiest are the par 5. So you actually do get 1 par 4 that sneaks into the top 4 in terms of ease of difficulty. The very short par 4 12th. But again, par 5s generally where pros will make their scoring prowess or show their scoring prowess. So there's a look at the top 10s and average strokes gained by hole by par. Again, a fairly even split between 3s, 4s, and 5s in the top 5s, as you saw in the top 10s in terms of distance from each other. Par 4s had a decent distance from the par 3s. Par 5s were a decent distance away from the par 4s in terms of importance. And then winners, about the same. Par 3s do lag a little bit behind when you get to the winners. The most difficult holes on the course are generally the par 4s here. However, you do have the aforementioned famous 17th, the Island Green, does play to a 10th of a shot over par. And then the very difficult long par 3 measures 237 on the scorecard, plays to 2/10 over par. So you do have a couple of difficult par 3s in here, but you see the most difficult hole is the 18th, par 4, 462, long par 4. Long par 4 is the second most difficult. Long par 4, the 4th most difficult. 5th most. It's really in these par 4s, and then the par 5s are shooting up in strokes gained just due to the fact that pros generally play par 5s the best, and that's where they get their scoring. So not sure how much we're going to be looking at par 3s, maybe a specific range, but as we saw for the winners, and I'll show you again, par 3s kind of lagged behind in terms of stroke gain. For the winners, especially the par 4s rose in importance, but fairly even split among 5s, 4s, and 3s throughout the leaderboard, or at least the top 10 of the leaderboard. Hole composition, the 17th, 0 to 150 is 137 on the scorecard. Of course, it can play anywhere from 105 to 155, depending on pin and tee box. But a short par 3, a couple of medium length par 3s, and then the very, very long 237. So even split of par 3s. You do have 3 short par 4s, 2 medium length or 2 short/medium, and then 5 from 450 to 500. And then the par 5s evenly split, 2 from 5 to 550, 2 from 550 to 6. As far as approach shots and the average versus the average event here, 200 plus is the most common approach shot here at TPC Sawgrass. However, it is lower than the average tour event. If you are wanting in relation to the average tour event, it would be 125 to 150, about 2% more common here at TPC Sawgrass. You also have 75 to 100, that is about 1.5% more common than the average tour event. So, as we always do, we will do a lot of scrutiny or scrutinizing of the proximities and the leaderboards tomorrow in the data dive to see if there's a specific range of approach shot that matters the most. But nothing stands out as of now, like the Arnold Palmer where 200 plus was king. Nothing stands out immediately as of yet. Historic cut line, this will speak to the average difficulty. Last year it got to +3, but remember last year was very unique in the sense that they had just an absolutely atrocious week for wind. It was a brutal test of golf, but most of the time it'll hover in this +1, might come down into the -1 area, but you're hovering in the +1 to +2 range. And you see in the early 2000 teens, you had 5 straight years where it was +1. So it'll hover in between +1, +2, might get to even, but generally is an average difficulty label. And you'll see that here as well. Almost 20% birdies, 19.5. You've got 16.8 or 17% bogeys, but you do have doubles just due to the sheer amount of water on the course. You stack the doubles and the bogeys on top of each other. It's about the same. So we're going to not be looking at anything specific with long or short courses. And at least to start the week, we're not going to be looking at easy or difficult scoring to par unless we get any ideas in terms of wind, or if the GCSA tournament fact sheet comes out tomorrow and shows drastic changes to the course that we think it'll go one way or the other. So really, in terms of overall or broad filters, we're really just kind of looking at Pete Dye courses in terms of broad filters for this week. No long, no short, no easy, no difficult. Driving accuracy, as I mentioned in the GCSA tournament fact sheet, slightly easier to hit here than the average tour event. Now, the players aren't necessarily concerned about going into the rough, but there is so much water in play that generally players will club down if there is any kind of danger that they need to avoid, as opposed to hitting driver and taking on the rough, just because water lurks everywhere. And you see that here, which is also fairly typical of Pete Dye designs. He has a lot of forced layups or positional style holes on his courses. So a lot of times players will hit fairway woods and irons off the tee to position themselves on the right or the correct portion of the hole, say the right side of the fairway, as opposed to maybe, or even right rough, as opposed to left side of the fairway. That is something that Pete Dye is very well known for. He loves to play with eye. He plays eye tricks on you angles of attack and all that stuff. So driving accuracy, a little bit lower here, or excuse me, a little bit higher here than the tour average tour event, but the distance is quite lower. Again, some positional style holes where you are forced to either lay up or it is just prudent to hit an iron or a wood as opposed to a driver. Now the greens here, very difficult to hit. Again, a lot of that due to the amount of water in play. 63% green regulation percentage here versus 66% or so at the average tour event. So we'll see if greens and regulation are a big factor year over year and see if we want to focus on that. Something that we are definitely going to be looking at, scrambling here. Players are much less successful scrambling around TPC Sawgrass than they are in the average tour event. 3 putts per round, higher than the average tour event. So scrambling we will look at throughout the week. Might look at some three putt avoidance on Bermuda greens. And then lastly, green and regulation proximity. Even though these greens are average in size or maybe even slightly smaller, you see the proximity here, almost 31 feet versus 29 for the average tour event, meaning that proximity is probably going to be something we want to look at, and we will see if there's a specific range or if it's total prox, all of that. But there's a look at TPC Sawgrass and the Players Championship from a Fantasy National scorecard and graphical style view. So now we come back here to the players page view for this year's field. And first thing I want to do, let's take a look at your top iron players. So I will bring this into the PGA Tour season. So dating back to the Fortinet in the fall with no other filters, your top strokes gained approach players this PGA Tour season: Tom Hoge, John Rahm, Ricky Fowler, Tony Finau, Xander, Gary Woodland, Nick Hardy, Russell Knox, Max Homa, Scotty Scheffler, and Tom Kim. Do note that neither the Puerto Rico Open or the Arnold Palmer Invitational are in here yet. Those will be updated throughout the night, I'm sure. And that reminds me that tomorrow morning, 10:30, over on Twitch, as part of my review for my mixed condition model and self-analysis, I also grab the performance or all of the strokes gained numbers from Fantasy National, bring them into Microsoft Excel and do a lot of analysis on that as well. So if you're interested in that, make sure you tune in to 10:30 tomorrow morning Eastern Time. But there's a look at your top strokes gained approach players. We know that we're on Bermuda greens, so I'm going to go ahead and add that filter. But before we take a look at the top putters, let's take a look at the historic conditions here, see if we can't get an idea for speeds and other type things here. So as I mentioned, scoring relative to par, you'll get a round of difficult every once in a while, but you see 90% of the rounds the past 5 years have been average. You'll also get an easy round thrown in there from time to time. Now 2017 was difficult every single round. More often difficult than easy. In fact, there's only been one easy round in 2018. But there's not enough difficult rounds for me to say that it's going to be difficult. It's generally average. So nothing to do with scoring. Greens, again, always classified as Bermuda. Hitting fairways, generally pretty average. You can get some easy, you can get some difficult, but generally average. Rough length, last year was long. And I imagine that a lot of that had to do with the amount of rain they had and the just difficult course conditions that they had to deal with last year. But you see average in the 2 tournaments prior. It's been short at times, so it's generally not difficult to play out of. I do want to see what the GCSA tournament fact sheet says And hopefully that'll be out tomorrow and see what the length of the rough is. If it is indeed 2.5 or 3, then that would generally lead to average. If it's anything above that, we could be looking at another long rough situation. So I'm going to hold off on making any assumptions there. Green speeds, fast and lightning, but mostly fast. They do get lightning occasionally, but generally fast. So we are going to look at fast and lightning Bermuda, since they are they have both been classified here at TPC Sawgrass. Let's see. This is just from the PGA Tour season. There should be enough for all of 2022. Oh yeah, 45 rounds. That's plenty. All right, so your top performers on fast and lightning Bermuda greens since the start of 2022. Those players have been Sam Burns, Terrell Hatton, Andrew Putnam, Bo Hostler, Kevin Kisner, Taylor Montgomery, Maverick McNeely, Brendan Todd, Harry Hall, and Tommy Fleetwood. And again, this will change with the Arnold Palmer tomorrow when the Arnold Palmer gets loaded in here, as those are historically lightning Bermuda greens. And I imagine at least 3/4 of the rounds this year were lightning. Yesterday or Saturday's might have been fast, because they did slow those down because of all the wind they had. But again, there's a look at your top fast and lightning Bermuda putters in the past 14 months. Don't think there's too much more I want to go into in terms of rankings and analysis in that regard. So let's go ahead and jump to the tournament history tab, or the strokes gained total tab. And again, just like we had with Puerto Rico last week, this tournament has been a TBC Sawgrass for as long as you can go back and check, but the 5 years actually stretches back to 2017. The Players was not played in 2020 due to 2020 being the year that it was. So when I say in the past 5 years, do note that this is stretching back to 2017, as the 2020 edition of the Players was canceled. But in the past 5 editions of the Players Championship, your strokes gained total leader is Keegan Bradley. A little bit shocking for me, honestly, but it's right there. In the past 4 years, he's been very good. 5th last year, a T7 in 2018, another top 20. And he did have a clunker in 2017, but he is still 5 for 5 in the past 5 events of the Players Championship. Tommy Fleetwood, 4 for 5, 2 top 10s. Your 2021 champion, Justin Thomas. 2018, Webb Simpson. 2017, Siwoo Kim. Rory won in 2019. So 4 of the last 5 winners are here. But again, your defending champion, last year's winner, not allowed to participate, Cameron Smith, who is now on LIV or at LIV. But let's see some other players here. Adam Scott, very, very good. Did miss the cut last year, but again, I'm more willing to accept that as an outlier with the horrendous conditions that were here at Sawgrass last year. Justin Thomas, 5 for 5. Now, Webb Simpson has struggled since he won. He did T16 the year after and then has missed the cut 2 straight years. Corey Connors is 3 for 3. Ryan Moore, 4 for 4. Did not play last year, but 4 for 4 the past 5 years. John Rahm, 5 for 5. Rory, a little bit of all or nothing here. He wins in 2019. 2 middling finishes, but he's alternated between making the cut and then missing the cut. So if the pattern continues, this would be a miscut for Rory, but I'm not going to say Rory's going to miss the cut. That's pretty bold. Tom Hoagie, 4 for 4. Nothing inspiring in terms of a top-end finish, but still 4 for 4. Johnny Vegas, 3 for 5. Chris Kirk, 4 for 5. Brian Harmon, 4 for 5, including 2 top 10s. So there's a look at some of the best performers in the past 5 years or 5 editions of the Players' Championship. The other end of the spectrum, players who have not played this well. Patrick Rogers, 2 for 5, but very high in the negative strokes gained total. Scott Piercy, 2 for 5. Robert Streb, 0 for 4. You have Chez Reavie, 2 for 5. He's missed the last 3. Andrew Putnam's 0 for 3. Bo Hostler's 1 for 4. Wyndham Clark, 0 for 2 and a DQ. Troy Merritt, 1 for 4. Patton Gazier, 3 for 5, but still negative. Now, he is getting better year over year here at TPC Sawgrass, but still negative in the past 5 years. Ricky, a former Players Champion, 2 for 4 here at TPC Sawgrass the past 5 editions. Let's see, Gary Woodland, 2 for 5. Scott Stallings, 1 for 4. So there's a look at some of the players who have struggled the past 5 years here at TPC Sawgrass. So with that, let's go ahead and move on over to Microsoft Excel and take a look at the Players Championship and TPC Sawgrass from a raw data type perspective. And we see, in terms of raw data, the players that have finished in the top 30 in the past 5 years. The off the tee has been pretty important, but do note that is a pretty significant outlier. So if we remove that, off the tee still looks like 11% more important than the average full field course, which would make sense. Again, with all of the trouble on the course, you're going to need to be accurate. Again, 9% with the approach. This is why I think it is more skewed towards ball striking than what the graphs showed. Putting's also a decent factor here at TPC Sawgrass. In fact, the irons, or your strokes gained approach, that's a very, very low outlier. My goodness. So if you remove that, that's going to be even more. Yeah, it's 19% more important. So again, just the emphasis on ball striking. Moving towards distance and driving and greens, that's a very, very low outlier for greens in regulation. If we remove that and move over distance, not really too big of a deal. Fairways also not showing a major importance. And again, I would tend to agree with that. If players are having to club down anyway, then the majority of players should be hitting the fairway already. Now greens, yes, we did remove the low outlier, and it was showing 3%. It's showing 5% less important, but that is a very low outlier. So greens in regulation probably going to be something that we focus on early on in the week, and we'll confirm that tomorrow in the data dive and look back at previous leaderboards. Scrolling across to scoring, again, Eagles is showing a very large number here, but there aren't a lot of Eagles. So you could absolutely convince me of birdies are better, but I don't think Eagles is something that we want to focus on by itself. Let's see. The birdies have been pretty darn consistent over the past 4 editions. I do not have 2017 in here, but over the past 4 editions, birdies gain's been pretty darn consistent. Doubles could be something with all the trouble in play on this course. So maybe I could be talked into it. Definitely going to be looking at that more closely tomorrow over on Twitch. But let's move into the 3s and the 4s and the 5s, the specific holes. There does not appear to be a specific range of par 3 that has a lot of bearing on the strokes gained total for par 3s. In fact, it's saying that the 17th is the most important par 3 here. But again, it's just one hole. How much do you want to put weight into one hole over the course of an entire golf tournament? I don't want to put a whole lot into it. So instead, I would look at just the par 3s. Now, that is a low outlier, lowish outlier. So if we remove the outlier, par 3s are 5% more important, but I don't get the sense that they're going to be extremely important this week. But if we do anything with par 3s, it's just going to be total par 3s. As you can see here, no length is dominant. And confirm that. You'll have to take that number away, as not every course has a 0 to 150 par 3. So that is quite heavily skewed. So, moving into the par 4s, you have 3 fairly solid lengths here, but none of them seem to have the dominance in terms of strokes gained total. Now that is a low outlier, so if I remove that, then okay, maybe the 450 to 500 would be a slightly more important. Would make some sense. They are generally the hardest holes here at TPC Sawgrass. There's also the most of them. There are five of the 10 par 4s fall to this range here. So, okay, I could see maybe splitting off the 450 to 5s. But even so, they're not making up a half of the in terms of strokes gained par 4. So, what did I do? There we go. So, I'm, at least early on, looking like I'm going to be focusing on just par 4s in this category. That's a slightly high outlier. Okay, but again, I don't see anything dominant in terms of a length for par 4s. If there is one, it's the 450 to 5s, but I can't confirm that early on a Sunday evening. Ooh, sorry, that feels better. Can't confirm that early on a Sunday, or early in the week, on a Sunday evening. We'll have to look into the data dive for that. Now, we move to the par 5s, and you do have the 500 to 550, or the shorter par 5s, saying that they are a decent amount more important than the 550 to 6s. In fact, look at this extremely high outlier. If you take that into consideration, the 550, or the 500 to 550s are double the importance. Could be something. And scrolling across, par 5s, 20% more important in general. And the 550 to 6s are pretty darn high in terms of against the other full field courses. So it'll be interesting to see tomorrow whether we want just the 500 to 550s or if it's par 5s in total when looking at prior leaderboards. Lastly, let's take a look at some proximity. Now that's a pretty big number, but overall this prox total number is really low. Ooh, look at this, 200 plus. That is a very low outlier, and when you take that out, this 200 plus number is going to be pretty big. 75 to 100 has been a pretty consistent metric other than in 2018. That's a low outlier. That's a low outlier. So let's see what it looks like without these outliers here in terms of proximity. As I thought, prox total, that was a really low number, so 34% less important. Okay. Now 75 to 100 seems pretty important, at least compared to the average full field course. And the 200 plus is saying it's pretty darn important. Not as important as the Arnold Palmer, but it is on the same level. Interesting. I don't know if I agree with that, but the data is right there. So again, a lot more we'll have to analyze tomorrow, to critique, scrutinize is the word I'm looking for, tomorrow in the Data Dive show, and see what kind of correlation there is for these 200 plus proximities. All right, so there's a look at TBC Sawgrass in terms of a raw data view. Last thing we're going to do, let's take a look at some performances specifically here at TBC Sawgrass the past 4 years. Again, I am not including 2017 in this. I just go back 5 years, and if a tournament's been canceled, it's just not in here. So this is only 4 years, but every year at TBC Sawgrass, you see the best average finish is Taylor Pendrith, but it was just one time last year. It was a top 15. There's Keegan. His average finish is a 14th. Justin Thomas, average finish of a top 20. Corey Connors, top 25. Tommy Fleetwood averages a top 30. He has missed the cut once. Jason Day is a former Players Champion, averages a top 30 finish. He's missed the cut once in the past 4 years. I am going to remove the players that have only played once. I want to get a feel for the players who have played consistently at the Players Championship and consistently well, what they've done. So we'll go to, I guess, the top 40. If a player's averaged a top 40. You've got a 1.6 here and off the tee. That is very, very high. But you see this strokes gained approach is going to be even higher with this heavy concentration of approach. That's a 2.2. So again, ball striking seemingly very, very important. We saw that graphically. You think about the players that have won here. Cameron Smith, more so known for a short game, but he has gotten a lot better, or did get a lot better off the tee before going to live. Justin Thomas, a ball striker, a very good short game, but ball striking. Rory, driving, ball striking. Jason Day, putting, but also could move it a little bit when he was healthy. Ricky in his heyday, again, a good putter, but was a very good iron player. So ball striking premier for the winners especially, and the players that have played the best here the past 4 editions. Let's see, around the green, 0.9, and putting, 0.6, and it's really only being saved by Billy Horschel, who just loves Bermuda. So, again, what I thought, this is a ball striking tournament. Moving to driving and greens and whatnot, you see distance not really a factor. To be expected when you have positional style holes and club downs and all that stuff. So distance not a factor. Not a factor. You do have some pretty high numbers in terms of good drives and greens, and fairways. You got some pretty heavy green in here. So fairways, it's a 1.3. Good drives, it's a 2.4. Okay, that's fairly high. But the greens is a 2.9. So again, I'm thinking the greens in regulation are going to be a pretty significant factor this week. These greens are difficult to hit, and the proximity when you do hit the green in regulation is further away than the average tour course. So thinking greens in regulation to start your research this week on that tab or in that statistical area. Moving to scoring. Let's see. You've got birdies, birdies. Looks pretty balanced. We kind of saw that in terms of the data in the comparison course workbook. Looks pretty balanced. It's a 1.3. It's a 2.1. Okay. So looking in here, you've got one player that is under field average in terms of bogey avoidance. It's only by a tenth. Every other player is positive by more than one, except for Dylan Fratelli. There's always got to be one jackass that makes my statement false. Damn. The majority of your players that have averaged a top 40 finish or better here at TPC Sawgrass have been very adept at avoiding bogeys here at TPC Sawgrass. So, okay. Interesting to note. Some pretty good numbers in double avoidance as well. Pretty good numbers there. But in terms of what the player's actually doing, birdies versus bogeys, it's been pretty even. So there's birdies, Gim's bogeys, birdies, bogeys, bogeys, birdies. So it's been pretty even. But in terms of totality, it looks like bogeys. Interesting. All right, par threes. Not too strong. This is a 1.2. Par fours. The 2.6. I know it's off your screen, but the par fives are a 1.3. Okay. And this was what, a 1.2? Wow. So that's actually saying it's the threes are close to the fives. I don't know if I believe that. Let's see. You got 3 negatives there, 4 negatives. Yeah, okay. So when we look at... So look here in the terms of the strokes gained total par threes. You've got a few players that are negative. You've got a 3.2 and a 2.9, sure. But you got 4 players that are negative. I'll scroll over to the par fives real quick. That same group, there's only 2 that are negative. And really 1 that's high negative in Fratelli. So I'm still thinking par fives are going to be more important. Is there a range in the par threes? Doesn't look like it. Maybe the 175 to 200, but it's not dominant. Par fours, pretty sustainable success. Only 1 player negative. If there's a range, I think it's safe to say it would be the 450 to 5. So that's lining up as well. And then par fives. Let's see. You've got a 0.6 and a 0.7. So it's actually even, showing 556 slightly more important. I imagine it's getting hurt quite a bit by Fratelli. Interesting. Last thing we'll take a look at, procs. For the players that, again, we've been looking at averaging a top 40. Total procs actually doesn't look to be a thing, which is surprising to me. That's what it's showing. It doesn't look to be a strong indicator. Now, 150 to 175 is pretty good. It's pretty strong. 200 plus for the players that have played it at an elite level has been good, but then it tails off fairly quickly. Same for the 175 to 200, but this 150 to 175 is kind of interesting. So that's where I'll be looking at quite a bit tomorrow to start with my, at least when I'm focusing on procs. I'm going to be looking at 150 to 175. But I will bring you back to the beginning of this spreadsheet. I'll remove the filters. So again, just a reminder, how many times they've played TPC Sawgrass in the past 5 years, their average finish, how many times they missed the cut, in those years, what they've averaged across each statistic. Well, that's going to do it for the initial research show for the 2023 Players Championship. Again, put it in the comments or reach out to me on social media if you were successful for the Arnold Palmer or the Puerto Rico. I want to be able to shout out members of the community that do well. I will be live tomorrow morning, 10:30 a.m. Eastern, over on Twitch to do all of my analysis from the Puerto Rico for the Arnold Palmer, grab all of the stats from the tournaments once they're loaded into Fantasy National. We'll also take a look at the odds board, see if anything in particular strikes our fancy. But the main gist of it is we're going to be looking at the form of the winners, their previous success at TBC Sawgrass, and we're going to try to find a pattern for the winners. So that's going to do it for the show tonight. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, watched, listened. Thanks for supporting the channel, for liking the videos, subscribing, commenting. Always appreciate it. Love what I do in taking a statistical look at golf and trying to win money in the process. So for all of the wagers that you made this past week, weekend for the Arnold Palmer and Puerto Rico, for all of the DFS contests you entered this past weekend for the Arnold Palmer and the Puerto Rico, and until I see you tomorrow night for the Daily Dive Show, may all your bets be profitable.